it's time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist, and in that description you can also find a link that'll take you to a page where you can buy this wonderful, wonderful book. 7th grade. There was no one more excited than I was when it was time for school to start back. I was glad that summer was over. I loved school, and I so enjoyed being around Miss Martson and Mrs. Henderson more than anything in the world. I'd seen a good bit of them during the summer in spite of the amount of time I worked at the Myers. Since I was also working for Mrs. Henderson, at a real paying job at that, Mama let me spend several nights a week sleeping at the Chapel House. I had a whole 75 cents of my very own money saved up, and I still had my work scholarship job of washing the steps in the Chapel House to pay my tuition. It was always exciting to me, at least, when the new textbooks and school supplies came in, and I just couldn't wait to get my hands on them. Our textbooks were never the same as the ones used in the county schools, and they were never really new either. Some churches in North Carolina and Kentucky would collect books that their local schools had considered outdated and send them to the mission. That made for an interesting variety. We always made do, though, and there was no doubt that we learned much more than the children who went to the public schools around here. Miss Martson would say, "It's not just what's in the book that matters, it's what's in your head and in your heart that makes the difference." The public schools in the community had trouble getting books and supplies too, and still did when I started teaching years later. I was always impatient about getting my school books. I guess I was forever raring to go about something. In the 7th grade, I knew for sure that I would have a Randy McNally geography book and a big red physiology book for health. And don't you know, just about every time I looked at that book, I thought of Charlie McGaha and the time I visited the school with Ada. While staying at the mission some that summer, I read nearly every book and magazine Miss Martson and Mrs. Henderson had. Why, it was just amazing to look in a magazine and see pictures of things you couldn't even imagine or dream of. Every page I turned was like discovering something new. The clothes people wore, the places they went, and where they lived in big cities with tall buildings. Now those were strange sights for a young girl who had only been outside her little community one time when she was 8 years old. I had never even been into Del Rio. Of all the books I read there, I liked the ones with a lot of pictures and the ones that told about the lives of real people best. Mrs. Henderson told me those were biographies and autobiographies. I liked some of the history books too. Reading those books gave me the idea that someday maybe I could write a book myself. That would just be the most wonderful thing, you know. Of course, the Bible was my favorite book. When I stayed at the Chapel House, I spent a lot of time talking to Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Robinson about the Bible. They would explain to me things about God and what certain passages meant. That's when I learned how important knowing God really was. Of course, my parents went to church and talked about it, but they couldn't read the Bible and explain what it meant. But early in life, I learned from Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Robinson and the others that reading the Bible and knowing God was just the most important thing there was in this life. That was it. And I've been reading my Bible all these years now. Miss Martson was my teacher again this year, and Miss Ivy Hood from Knoxville was the teacher for the younger grades. Miss Hood was older. Her hair was almost white compared to Miss Martson's gray strands. There are many older people who believe that because they are old, there's not much use for them. Why, they couldn't be more wrong. Many of the chapel women were older. If they had not come to work at the mission because they felt they were too old to contribute significantly, the people around here would probably still be living like they were at the turn of the century. It's really like Miss Martson said, being useful is not how much you have to give or to share, because surely that will soon be used up. It's how much the Lord has, and He ever so willingly gives through you to others. All you have to do is give Him control of your life. That's what makes you useful to Him, as well as every single being who crosses your path. Miss Robinson stayed busy taking care of the sick, especially since there was not a doctor close by. One time a girl in the community got badly burned on the leg. I don't know how it happened, but it was quite serious, so bad in fact that they said it had started to smell dead. They brought that girl up to the mission house, and Mrs. Robinson took care of her leg until it got better. If she hadn't have been there, keeping the burn clean, the girl probably would have died from infection. Though she did have a lot of scars, it was better than being dead. Miss Martson was always giving out hope and encouragement. She told us over and over again that we could do anything we wanted to do, be anything we wanted to be. Just because you're back here in this little community, don't you ever think you can't become something special. God has a wonderful purpose for your life, and He will put special dreams deep into your heart to help you discover His plan. Your life work is to listen to God and to do what He says. With His help, you can become anything He has planned for you to become. There are two very important things for you to always remember. One, even though it is extremely important to always work hard and do your best, you cannot do these things without God's help because they will be too big for you to accomplish. And two, you must never get ahead of God's plan for you. If you try to make things happen on your own, you will probably end up sorry you did not wait for God to work it out in His own timing. Even though this all sounds very difficult, it's much easier if you just remember, talk to God every day, listen to God every day, and every day do what God tells you to do. It's all about trusting and obeying, and then He works out all the rest, and you needn't worry about it. Miss Martson gave us a lot of mini sermons like that, and it always made us feel like we could accomplish anything. Miss Martson liked to tell us stories or read stories to us even after we were old enough to have easily read them for ourselves. Some of those were about people who were born poor but who grew up and made a difference by helping people. Some of them were about people who earned or raised a lot of money and then started schools and churches and orphanages. Dr. Garrett, 1836 through 1916, was one of those. He founded 3 orphanages, 2 colleges, 56 churches, schools, and mission houses that touched the lives of 40,000 pupils, 84 salaried workers, hundreds of unsalaried volunteers, 362 evangelists, and 6,304 salvations. She would usually say something like, "With God in your life, nothing is impossible." My life's dream. One day I told Miss Martson it would be almost too wonderful to think that I could be or do something special like that. Well, Miss Martson's face spread into a big grin, and then she put her hands on my shoulders and looked me square in the eyes. "Opal, my little jewel, you already are special. There is a wonderful plan laid out for your life. It's up to you to ask God to show you what He wants you to do. Then when He does, Opal, it's up to you to do your part. That means working hard and never giving up, and it will happen. Don't you ever give up on your dreams." With her constant encouragement, I found the courage to dream of what could be and the boldness to work at making those dreams come true. More and more I thought about how wonderful it would be if I could become an author. I wanted to make people feel the way I did when I picked up a book. Finally, one day, I told Miss Martson that I really wished to write a book. "Don't let me hear you wishing, Opal. You find a way to make it so. I know you can do it." "Miss Martson, you know I can't write a book and have it sound like those books you read to us." "Well, maybe you can't right now, not like those, but you can one day if you still have that desire. There are other kinds of books too, you know. Start with something you can do right now. You could take pictures of the community and the people and start making a picture book. Who knows? Someday it might be a pictorial history book that people will look at to see how things used to be here in the mountains." "But I don't have a camera or film or money for developing." I don't want to hear any more buts. Not having a camera, film, and money may be a problem, but problems are for solving. Buts are for excuses. So I decided to go ahead and make plans to do a pictorial history of the community. I found a catalog that advertised a Hawkeye camera for $1. I told Mama all about my plans and talks with Miss Martson. Mama, I have 75 cents saved for my work this summer. Please, Mama, if you'll give me the other quarter, you can keep the camera and just let me use it till I get grown. Mama only earned $1 a week washing clothes for the chapel women. That was the only cash money we had coming in, except for the little tobacco crop we grew. We traded and bartered for everything else. Well, Mama gave me the quarter I needed for the camera, but knowing that a pictorial history would be an expensive project, I started thinking of all the things I could do to make enough to finance my project. There were chestnuts and blackberries to be picked this time of the year, and this was something our family had done for ages. What I picked for myself would have to be done separately on my own, in addition to what I picked for the family. The chestnuts and blackberries were seasonal, so I would have to gather enough so my money would last until I could come up with some other ideas. Another problem would be getting what I picked to town. I knew Mama and Papa would never let me take them, and there'd be too many for me to carry anyway. But sure as I could be, I would find a way. Papa and Burl would probably help me, and they could buy the film for me when they were in town. Miss Martson had thoroughly convinced me that if the Lord put the idea in my head, He could also put the ideas in there that would help me earn the money I needed. You never know just how the Lord will provide, she would remind me. Miss Martson found an advertisement in a magazine for a place in Bristol, Tennessee, where I could get my film to be developed for only a quarter. After making my historical picture book, I still had hundreds of pictures left. I don't know how we ever got the money, but we had them developed. The Lord really did supply. Everyone in the community enjoyed those pictures. Years later, Catherine Marshall borrowed all those pictures to use in the research of her book, Christie. Then Ken Wells, a big movie producer from California, came to see about doing a movie of Christie, and he borrowed those pictures. And those pictures have been reprinted in the newspaper several times. The Lord even protected them from being burned up in a fire. I'll never forget the day I took my finished picture book, The Pictorial History of My Mountain Community, to show Miss Martson. Here it is, Miss Martson, my first finished book. You said I could do it, and I did. I think now I will write other books, real books. She was so pleased. Opal, there's another book that you've started without even realizing it. It's called The Life Book. It's called that because it's the book you write with your life. Every day you're adding pages. It can be a good book or one that's not so good. Good or bad, it is a book that everyone who meets you will read. Decide what you want your life book to say. It can encourage, inspire, and change lives, just like the books you have read and studied at the mission have changed your life. You know, I just heard that kind of talk so much that I really got the idea that I could do something special, and I couldn't think of anything more special than to be a mission worker like Miss Martson and Mrs. Henderson. Papa bringing people home. We always had lots of company, both family and strangers. Papa would invite anybody he saw to spend the night. Papa was an unusual person for sure. If he thought someone might not have a place to spend the night, he'd just bring them home with him. No one went without, not if Papa had anything to say about it. It's strange how people have changed from those days. Most wouldn't think of bringing someone into their home that wasn't close family, but they'd bring home a stray dog and treat that dog better than they would treat people. People used to get upset with me something awful because I took in strangers and made my dogs stay outside. When Papa brought home a stranger, they would sleep in the other bed in the curtained-off room. When Aunt Mandy and her family, who lived just down below town in Dutch Bottoms, would come visit us, we'd have people sleeping all over the place. Aunt Mary Pack used to visit a lot too after she moved down to West Myers. Papa had a lot of fun teasing Aunt Mandy and Aunt Dora, two of his sisters and their families. Both Mandy and Dora married Crumbs, so that made them Corn Crumbs. Papa would say, "Yeah, after these Corns started a-marrying all those Crumbs, sure didn't take no time at all till we had a whole bunch of crummy people round here." Papa was the jolliest person that you ever saw in your life. He was tall and big-boned and weighed well over 200 pounds, but he was not fat at all. We were taught to be principled and self-respecting. We were poor, but we never thought of ourselves that way. How can you be poor when you have so much to give away to others? Each of us girls had 2 dresses that were fit to wear out, one to wear to school and church, and another one that we wore to work and play in. I can never remember wanting for anything in my life. Now that may sound strange, but growing up, I really cannot remember ever wanting anything more than what I had. Everybody else around us lived the same as we did. My family and the chapel women had always taught us to be thankful for what we had. If we complained, Mama would say, "You just think of so-and-so," and she'd name off some child. They'd be glad to have what you've got. It didn't take much to make us realize that we were fortunate. Grandpa Hall comes to live with us. Grandpa Hall came to visit us several times. He was tall, slim, and had a mustache. He would always bring us surprises and cut up with us. Grandma only came with him a couple of times. They were getting old and the trip was too hard on her. When she did come, Mama would clear us out of the kitchen and they would spend a lot of time in there together. Grandma Hall died in 1924 or 25. Mama was sick at the time and unable to go to the funeral. Not long after Grandma died, Grandpa came to live with us. Papa made the curtained-off room a little bigger and moved Grandma's big old-timey bed with the high headboard over from Eastport along with a few other things. Mama and Papa fixed up a real nice place for him. Next to the bed, they put his table, and next to that went his chair. Grandpa was still particular about where things should go and how things should be done. Grandma had told Mama that she wanted her to have that bed when both she and Grandpa died. Grandma's bed first belonged to her grandmother and was over 100 years old. When my great-great-grandma was 11 years old, she was boarding out to take care of the family of a woman who had died or just had another baby. Actually, I don't know for sure why she was with that family, but anyway, the man couldn't afford to pay her, so he built her a bed and a chest. I don't know if it was losing Grandma or if he was sick and felt bad or if it was just his age, but Grandpa was not the same after that. Back then, people didn't talk about illness or problems much in front of the young'uns. Grandpa could have been eat up with cancer and nobody would have told us. He was hateful most of the time. If he laid down in the daytime, everyone had to be quiet and we were not allowed to play much around where he was. Mama had made a fly chaser by bending paper over a pole and sewing it in place. She cut the paper into little strips so they would make a noise to scare the flies. Velma and Desmer would take turns standing on the table by Grandpa's bed and moving the pole back and forth to keep the flies off of him the whole time he was sleeping. We always had a problem with flies getting in the house. There was no such thing as a screen door, and the outside doors were usually kept open for light and fresh air. Of course, we got plenty of fresh air through the spaces between the boards and the walls. We just had to put up with flies, and we always had to keep our food covered with a piece of cloth. Grandpa Hall died in July, about 1.5 years after moving in with us. In the wintertime, the creek would get frozen solid. A time or two each year, Papa would take the little ones for rides on a log sled, which was no more than 2 log runners with a big piece of wood fastened across the middle where you sat. Papa would pull them over the frozen creek without a thought of the ice breaking, for it was frozen so solid. The water doesn't get that solid anymore. It may be because they tore out all the dams. At one time, there were 5 or 6 dams by the mills that were all up and down the creek. Toting water from the spring was not an easy task in the warm weather, but in those cold winters, sometimes it was near impossible. There were times when everything was frozen, even the springs. We'll stop right there for today. Another interesting peek at Opal's life. So nice to hear her talk about everything. You're like me, I'm sure you feel like you kind of know her after we're learning more about her every week. I love the beginning about how excited she was about school. Now, I wasn't all that excited about school. I kind of just took school as it was. It wasn't my favorite thing in the whole world, but I didn't hate it either. It was just something I had to do. And there was parts I really liked and then parts I didn't like. But Opal loved school. Granny loved school like that. She's told me stories about it, especially as she got older and into high school and stuff. She just loved to learn and loved it so much. She just was like Opal, wanted to soak it all up. So I really love that picture of Opal getting excited and interested. She was so excited about those textbooks. And even though they were not new, they had been used before, they were new to her, and she was so excited about seeing them. I do still remember some of the covers of my textbooks, thinking about more so in elementary school than high school. And I liked high school okay, but I guess if I had to pick, my favorite was definitely elementary school. I went to a smaller school, so it was... they didn't have kindergarten when I started, but eventually it was even a pre-K. They even added a pre-K through an 8th grade school, but in my days it was a 1st through 8th grade school. I think we had Head Starts, what they called it back then. But it was a very small school, and everybody kind of, everybody knew each other, and the teachers knew us all, and maybe the teachers had Steve, so they knew, I was from that family, and knew my other Wilson cousins and all that. So much fonder memories for me of the elementary school than the high school. Not that high school was horrible for me or anything. I was very lucky. I had a good school experience. It was just that high school, I had to go to a bigger school, and it was not as intimate as Martins Creek. I love Opal's love of reading too. I did have that from a very early age. I can't really remember learning to read. I'm sure, I remember the teachers I had, but I don't necessarily remember actually learning to read. But I was probably in about, I don't know, maybe 4th grade, maybe 5th grade, probably about 4th grade, when I just realized I loved to read, that I could just lose myself in a book, And at Martins Creek, the school's no longer there that I went to. It burnt down. But had a real small library, really not much bigger than my kitchen and living room together, all put together. It was a small little area, but it had, had books, and I loved to get to go to the library, and we went maybe once a week or something like that, and I'd check out books, and I would have them all read, and then I'd take them back the next week and get more. I just loved to read. Now, mostly what I loved to read was fiction. I still love to read like that. I like... When I was young, if I didn't have a book, I'd read everything in the house, like Opal talks about reading the magazines and stuff. I just craved to read something. I'd read the back of the cereal box or something like that. But she said she loved the biographies. That's one of the things I remember about Martins Creek. I can still remember which shelf they were on. They were a lot of autobiographies about different people. Think of Abraham Lincoln and Florence Nightingale and people like that. And I went through them and read every one of them. And then I was sad when I'd read them all, And I was grown when the school did burn down. I wasn't married yet, but I was grown. And when we heard the sirens that night when it happened. We could hear them on the highway, even though it's a pretty far piece. But one of the first things, the next day, we found out it was the school that had burnt down. And I was sad for the school and, of course, for what it meant for students and the teachers and all that kind of stuff. But I was sad about those books. My mind went back to all the little books that I thought, and who knows if they was even still in there, because I'd been out of school for a long time. But I mourned for the library. And when my Papa Wade Wilson, when he died, this gentleman that owns a large cattle farm near us, E.J. Whitmire, he's passed away. Now his son manages it. But EJ, that's what he did in honor of Papa, was he'd put books in that library and they had a little placard in them, in memory of Wade Wilson, Reverend Wade Wilson, and I thought about those books too, how they were no more because they were burned up in there too. What an influence Miss Martson and Mrs. Henderson and the nurse, Mrs. Robertson, was that her name? I may be wrong about that. But what an influence all those mission people were on Opal. And she's told us that all through the book. She's talked about it. But you can really hear it in this part of it, how they encouraged her and how they, they taught her about the Bible, but they just encouraged her constantly to do what there was nothing that she couldn't do if she put her mind to it. And they were focusing on with the good Lord's help too. But what an influence. Now, you're probably like me. You can think back to lots of teachers that you liked, probably. I liked almost all teachers I ever had. But then there's some that really influenced you and that you still remember stuff that they told you. And Opal being so close there to the mission and then getting to spend the night and help them work in the summer and all that, she really developed a relationship with them. So it's really amazing the influence that they all had on Opal's life. And that's the wonderful thing about influences. Because they influenced Opal, shaped her life, then that influenced her children's life and her grandkids' lives and her community, her neighbors and all that. And then wonderfully, here it is influencing us today. Isn't that amazing to think about how that goes on and on and on? And then she shares how she was so excited. Her real desire was to write a book that would change people. And so they encouraged her to do that. Now, if you remember at the beginning of this book, when we were reading about, Barbara meeting Opal and kind of the pre-story to how this book come to be, Opal did not live to see this book. But she would be pleased to know that Barbara did such a fantastic job. Of course, Barbara is very close to her, but she would be so pleased to know that it come to fruition. It all did, and it turned out wonderful, and people have got to enjoy it, many, many people, and then here we are today still enjoying it. So that's really something really joyful, inspiring, and glorious, if you ask me, to think about, is about her desire for that and how it played out with the pictorial book, but also even later how this book, now it's her story. She told all that. She wrote down stuff. She spoke into the recorder, and Barbara really did the labor of love to put it all together. So how God used Opal, but also Barbara, is just amazing. And then a lot of Opal's personality, you wonder, well, where did it come from? Where did she get that? Certainly those women were an influence on her. And the men there at the mission, the different ones that she's talked about. But her family, her papa and her mama, what an influence they were on her. And I know that people, you can't help what you're born into, but I wish for all children and grown people too, that they could have had that. They could have had that kind of childhood to where they had that love and nurturing. Of course, teaching them, like she's talking about how they taught them to, be self-respecting and all that, but teaching them right from wrong, and then making sure they're took care of. Like the last week when we read about the wonderful way that the parents let them do at Christmas and stay up all night Christmas Eve, and how they just made it such a fun time for them. I wish all children could have that. And that was why Opal was the way that she was. And I really love when she talks about them, that they're so hard-working, all of them, the kids and them. That's why Opal's working really hard in this part. Just like last week we read about her staying with different people in the community. She's really working hard, but they're joyful. They're happy. They're happy about it. So I really, really love that. And then, of course, I love when she's saying that, she never really wanted for anything, and they didn't even realize they were poor. And if they did kind of get down about something, that their mother would tell them, you just need to think of so-and-so. They'd be glad to have this, some other little child's name. Just think of them. That's so like what Daddy told me when I was growing up, and I'd be complaining about something. He'd say, Tipper, you ought to always look around you, and you'll see somebody way worse off than you are. And he was absolutely, absolutely right. So I love that. And that taught Opal to be grateful and to be thankful for what she had. And that goes a long way in this old world for sure. And then we get to hear about Grandpa Hall again. Some of the earlier chapters is where she really talked about him and described him and how his like strangeness of wanting everything just perfect and all that, and the way he made his wife lay out and their maid lay out the table exactly right, and have it set for the next meal. You'll remember all that. So then the mother dies, and so he comes to live with them. And sounds like he was not the most pleasant guest to have there. And Opal says, she's just a kid. She looks back and she wonders, was he sick? Was he just because he was heartbroken? Was he just old and grouchy? What was wrong with him? But he stayed there with them about a year and a half, she says, until he died. Now, I don't have a mechanical mind. Like, I can't understand, like her telling about how her mother made the fly contraption thing that scared off flies. I just don't have a mechanical mind. I have no sense of direction. All those kind of things just evade my mind. But I can't figure out in my mind how she made that. I mean, I can't even hardly picture it. But what ingenious still. I mean, they just knew how to do everything. So her mama made that and sewed the papers, bent it backwards, she says, and sewed it. And then the two girls would put it over top of the grandfather so he could sleep and the flies wouldn't be over top of him. Or wouldn't land on him and wake him up. So, again, shows the wonderful kindness of Opal's family. He was a grouch, but there the two girls helped him, his two granddaughters. And then also, when he took a nap, everyone was just quiet. Even though, you could have said, you're a guest here, and this is our house, and these are our children, and they are loud, and I'm not going to make them be quiet, or I'm not going to be quiet myself. You could have said all those things, but instead they just obeyed his wishes. He was their elder, and they just obeyed what he said. Also interesting about Opal's papa, how he would bring everybody home, somebody that didn't have a place to stay. And then you can tell Opal was the same way, because she says people would get mad at her for inviting strangers to stay with her, but yet she let her dog stay outside. So just so much generosity and love in Opal's family. So it's just an amazing story. All this stuff is interesting, but when you really think of her little circle, the mission people, but her family, just what wonderful, tremendous people they were. I wish we could all aspire to be that, I guess. So I hope you enjoyed this part, and I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what part you liked about this. And of course, I hope you'll drop back by next week. We got to see what Opal talks about next.